Hi, everybody. Welcome to this Ask an IDEAS Grantee event. It's right about 1 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Megan Zacher, and I am the acting program manager for the IDEAS program right now. My colleague Rachel Rice is out on parental leave, and I'm so excited to have some really great panelists here, IDEAS Grantees, to help me host this panel and answer your questions, any that you may have about your IDEAS proposal for the FY20 grant competition. So before we get into our panel, just a couple of reminders about IDEAS. Obviously, we're hosting our annual grant competition right now and looking to award approximately 20 grants of up to $35,000 each to you at U.S. higher education institutions. The deadline is at the end of this month, February 26th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the link to upload all of your proposal documents is on our website. And just another quick plug for our IDEAS initiatives, which you are being a part of right now. These are our free workshops and webinars for the U.S. Study Abroad community. And we have another one coming up on February 18th on virtual exchanges with another great slate of panelists and experts in the field for those of you who are considering virtual exchange as part of your study abroad programming moving forward. And so with that, I will go ahead and get started with our panel. We've got, like I said, 4 great panelists here with us today, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves one at a time. Lori, do you want to start?
Do you want me to share a little bit about our proposal's focus?
Yeah, go ahead and share your name, where you're from, your role, and a little bit about your IDEAS grant and the proposal or the program you're working on.
Great, thanks. So hello, everyone. Good afternoon, if it's afternoon where you are. My name is Lori Moline, and I'm the Director of Internationalization and Inter-University Relations at Universidad del Sagrado Corazón, which translates as University of the Sacred Heart, in San Juan, Puerto Rico. We are a U.S. accredited institution within U.S. territory. So we are part of the current group of recipients of IDEAS grants, and our IDEAS grant funded 2 part-time personnel in the office, which has been wonderful during COVID, that have allowed us to increase the number of hours we spend advising students on study abroad, focus on target populations, and also develop resources, both videos and flyers, in Spanish about study abroad that we will be, at the end of the grant program, distributing to universities across the U.S. So the ability to hire those folks and focus on those tasks is what we've been able to accomplish during this IDEAS grant.
Thanks, Lori. Rebecca, would you like to go next?
Sure. So hello, everyone. I'm the Director of Global Education and an Associate Professor at the Community College of Baltimore County in Maryland. So I actually co-chair a consortium of international educators at Maryland community colleges, and 6 of our member colleges, 3 that are rural and 3 that have majority-minority status, decided to collaborate on this grant proposal together. And our goal was to start 2 new summer abroad programs that would be open to all students across all our community colleges statewide. And this was really important to us because a lot of our colleges and a lot of our students, we have difficulty filling programs for economic reasons because so many of our students work, all sorts of obstacles that they face, but collectively we can do it. So we were really excited about this possibility. One of our summer programs with an existing UK partner is geared towards rural students. 3 of our colleges are primarily rural. And then the other program that we're working on for summer abroad is primarily geared toward African American students. 3 of our community colleges are majority-minority status institutions. And we've actually decided to deploy our backup plan to move both of the programs from in-person to virtual for this summer, with the goal, of course, of ultimately running them in person. We actually did consider taking advantage of an opportunity that the grant offered to delay our program entirely for another summer until we could do it in person. But probably in part because we're a consortium, it offered us, on further consideration, a lot of advantages to start virtually by involving all of our colleges and having classes then participate, really only limited by our Zoom capacity. We can have classes all across our summer schedule tying into this virtual content for this summer. And that's been really helpful for all of our colleges in getting buy-in from our upper administrations, and also to really get the word out about the program in its first iteration this summer. So that's where we are with our planning.
Wonderful. Thanks, Rebecca. Lokesh, would you like to introduce yourself next?
All right. Thank you, Megan. Good afternoon, y'all. This is Lokesh Wakamaraya. I'm the Executive Director of International Relations and Assistant to Provost at Mississippi Valley State University in Mississippi Delta. I'm also the Chair of the Study Mississippi Consortium. IDEAS Grant has helped MVSU to increase the study abroad capacity. Our goal, as part of the proposal, our proposal focused on developing and creating a holistic strategy to increase the study abroad awareness by engaging students, faculty, and also gaining institutional support. For engaging our students, we have created an broad awareness campaign through various different initiatives that involves marketing study abroad programs, scholarships, as well as indirectly putting that the thought of study abroad in their mindset by offering various lecture series, cross-cultural events, and including using international cuisine. And when it comes to engaging our faculty, we are supporting them by conducting faculty study abroad workshops, as well as encouraging creative ideas through a seed grant, as well as instituting curriculum internationalization as part of our overall agenda to increase the study abroad capacity at Mississippi Valley State. And when it comes to the increasing the support, administrative support or the institutional support at Mississippi Valley State, we are focused on working with our academic affairs to, for faculty who are aiming for tenure track, we are working with our academic affairs to have that built into the tenure package. These are some of the things, and we also took advantage of extending the no-cost extension offered by World Learning to extend our grant until September 22nd. At the end of this grant period, we are hoping to receive at least 3 study abroad proposals and increase the global awareness and study abroad awareness among our students and institutional support. Thank you.
Thank you, Lokesh. And last but not least, Lawrence.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Lawrence Hare. I'm an associate professor in the history department at the University of Arkansas. And for the past 5 years, I was the director of the BA program in International and Global Studies in the College of Arts and Sciences. And we're on an extension for our IDEAS grant. Our grant was used to help us build a collaborative program across the 6 undergraduate colleges at the U of A for a project that's called Arkansas Global Changemakers. And what we do is we bring communities in Arkansas that are dealing with global issues, national priority areas, into dialogue with communities around the world to change ecosystems in those communities that are dealing with similar problems. And so our program sort of has launched as a study abroad program through the support of the IDEAS grant, and we're helping train students through intercultural competency and social innovation skills to become facilitators between our community partners and to learn to assess and create socially innovative and sustainable solutions for our partners. And since then, we have expanded. Of course, we've pivoted a bit from COVID. We initially were planning to launch a pilot program focused on food security with the partners in Barcelona, and we've pivoted to a virtual format, and we're trying to expand our capacity for virtual delivery in a number of other cities around the world. And so this grant has supported network development and has helped us build a larger faculty team to get more faculty buy-in on our campus.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I should also mention, while we're here and introducing ourselves, that I work at World Learning, which is the implementing partner for IDEAS with the State Department Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. And the U.S. government provides the funding for these excellent programs that our partners here are working on. And so with that, I would like to start the question and answer session. I know a lot of you who have registered for the event shared some really great questions in your registration form that I have and that I can use to kind of get started here. But a couple of just logistical points. If you're an attendee of the event, you currently don't have the option to unmute or show your video. It's just a function of the WebEx event system, but you do have the option to raise your hand. And so if you would raise your hand, then I can select you to speak and share your question with our panelists. So that would be one way to share your question and discuss. And the other option would be to share your question via the chat window, and then I will be able to read it out to our panelists here for them to answer it for you. And so I see we already have one question come in from Miranda McBride, who raised her hand. Thanks, Miranda. I'm going to unmute you, and you can go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Megan. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. I'm from North Carolina A&T State University in Greensboro, North Carolina. We are at HBCU, and we are planning on writing a proposal for this particular opportunity. All the programs that were mentioned here sound awesome. Various components of them would definitely be beneficial here at our institution as well. My primary questions, however, are related to budget because I need to run this through our Office of Sponsored Programs. And I wanted to know, is the U.S. Study Abroad, you mentioned that it's funded through the U.S. government. So is the U.S. Study Abroad a foundation, or is it a federal institution, or how is it classified? Because that'll dictate how much indirect we're likely to have to pay.
That sounds like a question for me. So the funding is issued through the U.S. government. It's not through a foundation. It's the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, but it's implemented by World Learning. So World Learning would actually be the person that you would have a sub-grant with, and we would issue funding to you on either a reimbursement schedule or on an advanced schedule. Does that answer your question, Miranda?
Yeah, the fact that it doesn't sound like it's a foundation. I guess my follow-up question to that is, do you guys have a cap on F&A, indirect?
We don't have a cap. I can't give a lot of guidance on indirect costs since it is determined by your institution, of course. Yeah. But you can either go off of your negotiated indirect cost agreement, or there's a de minimis cost of just 10%, and it's up to your institution to determine the way you'd like to pursue that. But there's not any limit or guidance there beyond that.
Just to follow up on that last thing that you said, you said a de minimis cost? I've never heard of that. Can you explain what that is? Because I'm trying to negotiate. I'm trying to get the most out of this grant, and if I go off of our negotiated rate, it's going to eat up half of what is provided by the funding agency. So yeah, anything that I can do to lower that is going to be beneficial, and that'll dictate, of course, everything that I put into the proposal. So what was the 10% you mentioned?
The de minimis rate is 10%, and it's I wish I had a better idea of. It's a little hard to understand indirect costs, but it is the minimum rate that you can apply for indirect costs if your grant charges indirect costs to, if your proposal charges indirect costs with the grant, if you're required to.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. If any grantees have any thoughts about indirect costs and how you were able to incorporate those into your budget, I don't know if you had any issues like Miranda did with trying to negotiate those, please feel free to jump in and share. Otherwise, I'll move on to our next question. It looks like Arno Kurtz has his hand raised, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Arno.
you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thanks for having me, and thanks for these wonderful presentations. And I do have a question, but maybe I can also, even though I'm not a grantee, I hope to become one. I'm working also through budgetary issues, and if it's of any help for the applicant right now, your Office of Sponsored Programs should also be helpful in regards to finding a lower rate. For instance, when I sat down with my office, they said, well, if we figure out a way that it's more housed as a virtual event or then abroad, even though we're strengthening the institutional capacities, then we could charge a lower rate. But again, those are questions that you need to address within the institutional policies, right? But I think I would urge you to sit down with the officers there, because they're usually trying to find lower rates in an effort to consolidate programs. But my question was with regards to, I think Lawrence, some of all of you touched on these issues, but Lawrence particular touched on the issue of strengthening networks, right? So while we're trying to build our institutional capacity, and I'm from Montclair State University, second largest public university in New Jersey, and we are a Hispanic serving institution. And so the question here would be, while we try to strengthen study abroad, and that is in our strategic goals, and we want to serve these specific populations, how has Lawrence specifically or any other grantee worked on building in the strengthening of network capacity? Has that been done virtually? Were the workshops in person? Because we're all through the pandemic in a stage where, everything happens over Zoom. But we also know that, and we've seen this from the corporate or business world, that in-person meetings are very important for trust building, for forging relationships that are very necessary for networks. So if you could speak a bit about more how that concretely looks like and how to build that into the grant.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think when we talk about capacity building, networks are going to be really critical, a critical part of that. And so we fortunately started our grant period pre-COVID. And so we wanted to expand networks in a couple of different ways. One is building the community partners with which we wanted to work overseas. We have a very specific model for how we engage through our study abroad courses. We want to look at change agencies, but we also want to look at change ecosystems. And so we had the challenge of pulling together, across sectors, different agencies in the cities that we chose to work, so that our students could sort of see how these agencies work together. And when we're talking about social innovation, we're talking about addressing the needs of specific organizations, but also addressing the needs for collaboration across organizations. And so that networking was important. And then we also wanted to increase our faculty networks, because one of our goals is to enhance curricular integration for study abroad. We think that will facilitate better participation in study abroad. And because it was pre-COVID, we were able to do this in workshops, and we were able to do this with a strong focus on a project. And we invited faculty. We had really good turnout from faculty. We also invited community partners in Northwest Arkansas, where our university is based. And we were able to sort of create space for our faculty and community partners to think creatively about ways that they could plug into the project. Now that we're in the sort of COVIDic era, we have turned to more virtual outreach, and we've sort of, World Learning IDEAS has been really great about working with us on our budget to try to pivot as the circumstances have changed. And so this semester, we're actually hiring consultants abroad to help us build our network capacity, since we can't physically be on the ground there. And so that's been our current focus.
Great. Thank you so much. That's very helpful.
Great. I'm going to take a question from the chat now.
Megan, I want to add something
sure.
to that.
Go ahead.
They're talking about building network. Our grant started in August of this year. So basically, we ran into we had to adhere to all the COVID protocol and stuff like that. So what we did, we pivoted towards, or networking, we pivoted towards reaching out to our potential partners, be it or other organizations. For example, we were able to start a global conversation club with one of our Peru partners. And they're giving an opportunity to engage virtually. And on top of that,
Okay, she broke up a little bit, but it looks like you're muted now. Are you finished speaking? The fun of hosting virtual events. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on to a question from the chat. Rachel Fitzgerald has asked if any of you would be willing to speak to the monitoring and evaluation plan section and any strategies that your institution used for addressing the needs of that component in the proposal. She says, for example, if the project outcome is the development of a study abroad program, what might be the best approach to addressing the indicators and benchmarks? A focus on the monitoring and evaluation for the development of the program or indicators related to the outcomes of the study abroad program? Do you have any thoughts you'd like to share about that one? No, monitoring and evaluation can be tricky, especially if you're a smaller office.
I can speak to a few of the components that we put in ours. Rachel, we're looking a lot at whether we met our goals for demographics. Do we have the numbers of students we were hoping for? Are we engaging more than any of our institutions has previously with underrepresented populations like the rural and the African American students that two of our programs are being largely designed for, even though the programs are, of course, open to all students. So we're looking at the demographic piece, which we can just easily do in our office by counting up, numbers and things at the end. We're also, in conjunction with that, doing a qualitative piece where we're doing focus groups with participants. We're analyzing participants' coursework to make sure that our academic and our cultural goals are being met. So ours are primarily outcomes-oriented, but of course we're developing the program so that we'll be able to collect data to make sure our goals are met. Does that address what you were looking for?
I think so. She just asked the question in the chat, so she can't respond. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Jan Shetler, if you'd like to go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. I have so many questions, but maybe I will focus on a few of them. So in the program description starts out with a statement of need and goes right to sort of, the first point under that, which is capacity building. It feels like I need to take a kind of introduction to talking about our program and our demographics and why we're doing what we're doing, sort of like the big picture. And is that fair enough not to just go straight to the capacity building section? And then the other one is a very specific question about, I know that, so part of ours is starting a short-term program in India. And so part of our budget is to send the faculty member for some preparatory work before the group would go in the summer. And so the question is whether we can also pay the faculty members transportation there when he and the assistant actually go for the course itself. So those are two kind of big and smaller questions.
Does anyone want to share their thoughts on developing that statement of need in the capacity building section?
Bit about it, and then maybe someone else will want to add something, and Jan, we'll see if I answer what you were really looking for in that question. I found the statement of need a helpful way to not only present an introduction to the university, but really nail down what I'm looking for out of this grant program. So I had to define what's the need that I want to share that will compel them to see this project as worthy of the funds and the effort that they will be putting into it. So I used it, as I do in many grant proposals, as a way to introduce the basics about the university. I looked directly at what the proposal called for and then gave myself some headers out of that to divide up my focus within the statement of need. And I think the text that I pulled from the grant language from the call for grant proposals had to do with providing a basis for the approaches, strategies, and activities I would be promoting. And in our case, since we identified our study abroad program infrastructure as the weakness that we needed to overcome, then we were able to really clearly identify what are the specific things we can do with this amount of money to meet that need. So for me, it served as an introduction, but also a way for me to really hone in on what I wanted to get out of the funds available through this grant.
Thank you. That's great.
Sure, and I can also answer your question about faculty travel. Yes, that is in the eligible cost. All right. Ask another question from the chat. As all of you know, there's been an aspect of the proposal that is incorporating a foreign policy goal, and this year it's been an option up until this point, and this year it's a requirement of the grant proposal. So Sigrid's asked if anyone would be willing to give some examples about how you've related your proposal to the foreign policy goals, democracy, public health, entrepreneurship. If that's a new part this year, anybody have any thoughts on that one?
It's very central to our application at the University of Arkansas, and of course we had a range of issues that our project deals with, and we actually have a process for identifying those issues. So if there has to be a clear need here in the state of Arkansas for that has to be a priority area for us as a state, and we have actually numbers on that. And then there has to be a capacity for change in Arkansas that we can actually study. So that was our process for identifying. And then for the purpose of the grant, we really emphasized the particular issue, or actually, we actually emphasized two. We emphasized food security and skills gap. And we identified those because we had the most sort of preliminary work in those areas. And then because the grant is fairly small, we really focused on that issue, but we put it into our planning that we had hoped to build the model through the grant project and then expand out to other issues later. So that was our approach.
Ours was actually even a bit more simple. We wanted to engage certain underrepresented student populations, and we found that the majority of those students tended to major in a couple of the subjects that intersected very clearly with the foreign policy goals. So that involves business majors and health professions majors in our case. So our content for the programs is going to be built around those themes that connected to those students' majors, with experiential components as well, so that we're really going deeper with the content than just pure classroom type learning.
I'm going to go ahead and take another question from the audience. Katie or Katya, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
I'm Kathy, and I appreciate everyone's perspective, the previous grant awardees. I think this may be a question for Lawrence, and I'm curious about, in terms of the budget, if I understood you had given some funding for faculty for course development, and if you could explain how specific or not that funding was, like the flexibility for the course development, if I understood that correctly.
Yeah, we actually didn't spend a lot of our resources on specific course development. What we did was in our initial budget, we had focused a lot of the resources on the development of a pilot, and so that was the core grant team working on that. And the idea was to sort of prove concept through the pilot and to sort of fine tune the model, get the team working together, and then the idea was to take that pilot and sort of bring faculty, not only to show here's what we did, but to bring faculty and community partners into the process of developing that pilot so they could actually see, what we were doing. But the resources really, for us, helped with, on the one hand, I guess we had planned for site visits, and then of course COVID sort of the whole on the ground experience was sort of interrupted by COVID. But we had planned for site visits, and then we actually had a plan for community partners to actually take part in the course itself, and that included in the run up to the course and then in the course. So they would actually have some funding as mentors for our students. And then there was some funding for us, so we could team teach the course, because this is a collaborative project. My main partner is in our College of Business, and so we have very different skill sets, and if we're going to make this course work, we got to bring those skill sets together. So the funding was to facilitate our travel. We can't use the money directly for student support, so instead we used it to support the faculty, so we could have the team that we needed, and then that makes that possible, and it lowers the total cost for those students.
Thank you so much.
Great. And next up, Ramona, you can go ahead and ask your question.
For this panel, I've got a full page now of notes and so many questions. I wanted to ask first, and it's a segue to some of the questions that have been asked already in terms of the grant period planning. As I understand it from reading some of the previous grants and listening, the grant can be for capacity building in terms of planning. Does it have to include an actual pilot or program for students to go abroad? And I say that because my particular institution, Hollins University in Roanoke, Virginia, we do not have a summer semester. So the grant period from June 2021 to August 2022, we're looking at site visits for a partner institution in Kenya, and NGOs as well, and developing experiential learning, short-term faculty-led exchange program, and a COIL, Collaborative Online International Learning component. And that would not entail putting that into operation until fall, September of 2022, I believe. So that's my question. Can it be just for the planning and capacity building and development of the program, or does it have to include a student component?
I can answer that one, and the short answer is it is not required to have student travel or anything like that you mentioned. We of course know that it takes a bit of time to get these things off the ground. So the short answer is no, you don't have to fully implement everything. The little caveat to that is that any grant activities that require grant funding have to take place within the grant period. So if there's funding going towards experiential or exploratory travel, rather, that has to happen within that year. But if the exploratory travel is in advance of a student trip, for example, then that student trip or program isn't taking part as part of the funding, then that doesn't need to take place within the grant period. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and I'm sorry, I'm going to be really greedy. Statement of need versus executive summary, because I think it was Laurie who was describing using the statement of need as the intro to the university, and I actually have the drafted executive summary that does that. So I would love to know the difference between executive summary, your statement of need. Is there a difference? What are the elements of the executive summary that you all are looking for versus the statement of need?
I'm going to start off with that. With the executive summary, what we did was we emphasized on the overall objective of the program. We gave a high-level abstract view of what we want to accomplish as part of the IDEAS grant. And with the statement of need, we were able to justify why we need that funding. What are the rationale? For example, a few things I would state is, when we interviewed or surveyed our students, many of our students were apprehensive about travel abroad, or study abroad. And so what we had to do is, one of the things we identified that we need to do is we need to increase the study abroad awareness and the benefits of that. So we use the statement of need to address some of those things.
Share a little bit, since I'm the one who commented earlier about the statement of need. I personally worked on the executive summary as if it were the traditional 5-paragraph essay from 5th grade or whenever they taught that to us. So I start out with who we are, and then what our need is, and then within that executive summary, I indicate what are our specific objectives. So I kind of lead up to what's the rationale, what are the specific objectives, what are the activities in a very succinct way that we will engage in to reach those objectives, and then basically concluding with the specific justification of how much money we will need. So it's literally like a summary of the rest of my entire proposal, but all within the scope of one page, whereas the statement of need really digs into the history behind the challenges that we have, the history that leads us to what project we want to do now, and how that will connect with the future that we're working towards as an institution. And so it's much more elaborate and laid out.
Same thing with,
Oh, go ahead. Rebecca, go ahead with that one.
Oh, no, please go on.
I was just going to say, Megan, I'd like to add about Ramona's first question that our proposal has absolutely no travel involved. And in fact, for those of you who might be listening and wondering, did not include planning for travel. Our proposal is really focused on targeting new and specific populations for study abroad promotion, and building our capacity long-term to be able to implement those marketing activities and successfully apply those marketing activities after the grant period is over, so that in general, we are much stronger at study abroad advising, promotion, et cetera, overall. And it does allow for us to build out our network by exploring new collaborations where we could have future study abroad activities, but we are not doing anything that is specific travel planning or will lead to a trip in particular. So that's also an option.
I was just going to give a little sense just at the most basic level. So the statement of need and my proposal, I just glanced at it while the others were speaking. We go in depth about our challenges, and then that became a sentence or two summary within the executive summary.
Thank you.
That was great.
Oh. All right, and the next question I'll take from Subia Small. You can go ahead.
Great presentation. I was wondering whether I was going to be called, because it seems to me that I was thinking, is my hand going to be called upon? But I enjoyed the presentation. I am from the University of Texas at Arlington in Texas. And I am from the School of Social Work. In our School of Social Work, we have a community partnership with organizations in Kenya, where we have interns working with some community partners in Kenya. I was wondering whether this grant could support service learning abroad, for example, to enhance and increase capacity of students that's going to augment the internship that we have there, so that they can work with elementary school children and middle school children. So, in other words, I'm asking, is there something that this grant could not support, for example, taking students abroad for that kind of service learning that you develop? And secondly, I didn't see in the program how long should this application be? Is there a page limit or word limit?
For the page limit question, I'll answer that quickly just because it's an easy answer. The page limit is 22 total pages. There's a breakdown of all of the sections and their limits in the RFP on our website. I apologize, I don't remember the page number. It's all off the top of my head. But to answer your second question about student service learning, first, the student travel costs are not permitted as part of your grant budget. So that would need to be taken into account. And service learning is not necessarily prohibited, although the program should be 4-credit programs. not in. Anyways, it all must be for credit programming, not non-credit bearing programs. Does that answer your question?
I didn't understand that part. It should be for credit because you're planning to have a course, service learning, but it's going to be 2 courses, 3 credit per course. Would that suffice?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
And it looks like Beatrice has a kind of follow-up question about credit internships. If anyone has any thoughts about including credit internships in their programming, those are permitted as far as grant allowables go, but I don't know if anyone has any experience they want to share about internships.
I'll just say really quickly, we had hoped that we would see high impact experiences, and internships was right up there, but also research and we actually have a social innovation challenge that we have on campus, and we were hoping to see these experiences grow out of the project that we're engaging in with the grant. So that's sort of an outcome that we hope to promote. I definitely think that that's something that you can use to think about how you're making international education and study abroad appealing to a student who has to find time and resources to build that into their curriculum. And certainly that work experience and the experience of service learning have that appeal.
Thanks. Trying to see if does anybody else have any questions. It looks like we've answered everyone's whose hands are raised. And I don't have any more in the chat other than a question about travel advisory levels and eligibility there, which I can also answer quickly, but I don't want to monopolize the conversation. So the guidance for travel advisories is travel advisory level 1 and 2 are permitted for any location, or you can propose anything to those 2 types of locations. If a location such as Peru, which is listed at level 3 right now because of COVID, as most places are, you can propose that location. But if the COVID level doesn't decrease and the travel advisory level does not go back down to its normal level of a level 1 or level 2 when your programming starts, then you may have to change the location of your travel. There are more details on the RFP, which I just sent a link to in the chat. And Arno, if you have a follow-up question, that would be great. I'll unmute you. Go right ahead.
Megan, from what has been said, and this is all very, very helpful, and everyone has a different experience, and there's sort of certain commonalities. I wanted to, it's a twofold question. So one is about certain grantees have shown that they focus in on one particular area, whether that's figuring out underrepresented populations, trying to make sure that that ground is being addressed properly. But then Lawrence, for instance, had said it's about networking. So can grantees maybe speak to this, whether when we draft our proposal, whether one should focus on an area or is a way of combining these, and whether there's a better approach with regards to this capacity building. And the second part of that question relates to our current situation. The pandemic is a certain curse. Megan said, like, oh my gosh, the joys of Zooming and then not having a real person in front of you. But we've also learned during the pandemic that it's opened up horizons, right? I think Lawrence mentioned that, well, they do a lot of workshops online. So to what extent would it be then also beneficial? Because at my institution, because we do serve a lot of underrepresented students, it's not only about raising awareness for study abroad programs, but sometimes there's also financial burden or need that cannot be met. And that is a separate question with regards to how can we find scholarships for those that are very much in need. But to what extent can we then virtually also create a platform still with the idea of eventually having a certain percentage go abroad, because the real life experience is still not is still very different and very important with regards to experiencing new cultures, new horizons, meeting new people, right? But how can that go hand in hand with sort of the virtual component, and how much do you weigh that in the application process? Thanks.
Do you want me to start us off? I can't address how you guys are looking at that in the process. So Megan, maybe you'll want to talk about that. These are great questions, and the virtual question is really on our minds. It's created opportunities, but it's also created new needs in some ways. So we've actually have a task force working on sort of bringing virtual international education more routinely into our curriculum. Like this is something we never imagined. Virtual study abroad sounds like something like a paradox almost, right? You can't do it. And now we're moving to a point where we want to do it more often. And so the opportunity that we've seen, and part of the ways that we've pivoted in our grant. And so, I told another person that asked a question that we didn't do a lot of course development, and I totally forgot that when we were hiring consultants, one of the consultants we hired we have a campus in Rome, and we hired a consultant to collaborate with our Rome Center to help us build a virtual experience through our Rome Center, really aiming at first-year students, right? So you're bringing them into the process of international education, and you're getting them thinking about how international education fits into their curriculum, and then hopefully in the long term you're going to increase participation and you're going to diversify participation. And so that's the opportunity. But the challenge is, how do you prevent that from becoming a bifurcated experience where you have some that can do the virtual but then don't have the resources to go on, and then or feel like they can't make it work. And so we haven't we're wrestling with that. So that's a new need that has come out of this environment. But certainly the virtual opportunities have made it possible in principle to expand the reach of international education and to bring more students on board.
And to what Lawrence has said, that you all are in a special place, because a year ago I submitted my proposal in February, and then in March we all went into lockdown, and obviously all of the grantees who were notified in July had to pivot immediately. And I think all of you can consider both virtual and in-person experiences in your proposals, given that the next year will likely continue to be a blend of those things. And I think that gives you an advantage to explore more opportunities and think of more ways to impact students. In my case, Arnaud, I knew that our students do not typically have the funding to be able to take a physical trip abroad without a scholarship. And so I decided not to write a grant proposal that focuses on going abroad if I could not include scholarship money for students, but that made me think through what else can I do. And so as a result, now our study abroad advisors have participated in things like being a Gilman evaluator. We now offer virtual walk-in sessions to work on scholarship application essays. We've increased promotion of those opportunities, and we have monthly virtual sessions about how to finance your experience abroad. And so we've been able to look at what we can do to help our students across the board be more prepared. And then we've, as part of our goals for the IDEAS grant, we've specifically targeted Pell Grant recipients. But all of those are things that I may not have thought to do if I had jumped immediately to the idea of planning a trip. And I think that those things will have a long-term impact on how many students do end up going abroad from our institution.
Excellent. Thank you. That's very helpful so far.
Grant writing perspective, my college's grants office is always trying to push us toward making sure that our overarching theme is very clear, that we don't have too many small little goals that are diluting our aims for the person who's adjudicating the grants. So when you go through your grant proposal, make sure that your central point and your central goal is very clear and very clear throughout, because the people who are reviewing them are reading tons of them in a very short time and having to adjudicate on specific little points.
Great, Rebecca. That's also very helpful.
minutes, I'm going to take a couple more questions from the audience. Mandy, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Sure, thank you. All these answers have been extremely helpful as we work on our program or our proposal as well. One question I had is, does anybody have any advice for how to fill out the logic templates that are required for the application? Because I know that's one thing we're kind of struggling with, how to place everything on there.
To that, I feel like I went through a good training with that at my previous institution with a faculty member there who was very strong in that area. And I find that that's a good place to start and try and organize your thoughts using the logic model first, and then build out the text of your proposal around that. I think it feels easiest to write the proposal first and then build the logic model as a result. But I do find the logic model a challenging exercise that forces you to focus specifically on identifying the problem, perhaps in just one sentence, and then what are the inputs that can work towards outcomes that resolve that problem. It's one of the most difficult parts of the proposal for me, but I do find it helpful as a guiding tool rather than a reaction tool.
Thank you.
Another question about foreign policy goals. Go ahead.
So actually, I had several questions I've been waiting for a little bit. But for the foreign policy goal, I sat in on one of the webinars earlier, and it sounded like that if we're focusing on a specific group, student group, they told us we had to use the economic development and entrepreneurship goal. Why is that? Why are we forced to use that specific goal?
You're not forced to use any specific goal. That's just a tip. It's just a different way of thinking about the foreign policy goals. If you're focusing on a certain group and it's a little bit challenging to fit within a different goal, the economic development one is a great way to think about how your activities may influence economic development on a broader scale rather than specifically like a public health focus or something like that. Is a little bit more niche.
Okay, so they were just saying that we can look a little more broadly at that goal if we couldn't find some other goal to fit in.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, and I did have a question about the cover page. Is there a specific format we're supposed to follow for the cover page? Okay, so no format.
No format.
And
make sure you include what's listed in the RFP.
Okay, and it said resume 2 pages. Is that 2 pages for each of the primary people who are going to be engaged, or just one person 2 pages, or
2 pages total for so if you're submitting 2 staff people, then 2 1-page resumes.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And highlight the things that are important for your grant activities.
Okay. And I think the last one was the award time. When will we be notified, or when are awardees going to be notified that they have received the award? Because for what I'm planning, I'd need to move quickly in the fall if I was awarded. So
awardees will be announced in the spring, in May.
So before this semester is out.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Sure thing. Mary Wong, would you like to ask your question now?
Yeah, thank you for the seminar. It's great. I just love this grant. The comment that was just made earlier about not having too many pieces kind of worried me. I'm trying to do so much with this. It's like, whoa, what could I do? And so I have a wonderful trip to Burma, Thailand planned with nursing and TESOL and, trying to get that budget down to $25,000 so that I can also help diversify Fulbright applicants. I'm the Fulbright program advisor, and I really want to have more African American and Hispanic applicants. We're an Hispanic serving institution. So I have $5,000 for that. And then I really want to have more MOUs so we can have internships with other universities. So I'm on my sabbatical in Asia, so I want to do little short trips to do that. So I have $5,000 with that. Do you think that's, to me, this supports the overall goal of supporting study abroad at my institution. I try to make that. But do you think having those two little extra things for 5K each is going to detract from the overall project? I know that's hard to say because you haven't seen the whole application, but what are your thoughts on that?
One participant's perspective, and that's my grants office's take on it based on their experience. I can say that they've won lots and lots of really big grants, but of course, I'm just one participant, so, however you articulate your ideas, I would just advise being very clear. Make sure it's something that you can try to summarize in a short sentence. But again, that's not advice from World Learning. That's just advice from someone who reviews grant proposals sometimes and who works with an office that tends to give that advice and does well.
What about the rest of you? Does anyone have any other comments on that?
With Rebecca, I think the most important thing is how you frame it and how well you're able to synthesize those ideas around a common goal.
Okay. Just make sure there's an overarching common goal that they all support and make that point clearly. Okay, thank you.
I completely agree, and I think I know that it takes a lot of time and energy to put a grant together like this, and the positive, no matter what happens, one of the things that you get out of this is you get a chance, especially with your team, to really think about what your needs are and what your goals are, and so there's sort of the process of applying really helps crystallize your trajectory as an institution. And so even if your ultimate application doesn't include everything that you've identified as a goal, and you've decided that you want to focus in on certain aspects, this is still a positive process for you guys, I think.
Thank you.
One more question, so I'm going to let Stephen go ahead and ask his.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So two questions, actually. You can pick which one you want to answer, maybe. First one is infrastructure or, say, software licenses, for the purpose of a blended program that combines virtual with sustainability? Are those are funds able to be spent on that type of infrastructure? Second question is, are institutions that are not colleges and universities, but which work with universities and colleges to build, say, networks of teaching and learning expertise, are those institutions also eligible to apply directly, or do we have to? So those are the questions.
About the licensing for software, because my grant does include our initial use and first-year membership with the VIA TRM software. So we included that in our grant proposal as one way of strengthening our study abroad infrastructure, since until now we were using Google Sheets. And that VIA TRM licensing has been incredibly helpful to us, and we have a sustainability plan for how we will continue to pay for it after the grant period.
Thank you.
Remind me what your second question was.
Yeah, the second question was whether institutions that work with universities and colleges that are not universities and colleges themselves, are they eligible to apply, or do we directly need for your colleges and universities, or 2 years?
Yep, thanks. Funding is only eligible, institutions must be accredited U.S. higher education institutions based in the U.S., not providers or partners. Any funding would need to go through the institution or potentially through an institution's foundation. All right. And with that, it's just about 2 o'clock, and so I want to allow our presenters to get back to their busy day. And we still have a couple of questions in the chat window. And if I go didn't get to yours today, I will follow up with you via email, just to make sure everybody's questions get answered and you're all as equipped as possible to write your proposal. But I want to say thank you to everybody for joining this event today. I hope it was very helpful, and thank you so much to our presenters for making the time to share about your proposal and your grant activities. I'll pull back up the slide with their email addresses on it so that you all can see it in case you would like to reach out to any of our presenters today. And then if you have any questions that you didn't get to ask in the chat window or during this event or any that come up, feel free to email me directly at ideas@worldlearning.org. You can also find, of course, our RFP and a bunch of other resources and templates on the IDEAS website, which is studyabroadcapacitybuilding.org in the grant competition tab. So thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Megan.
The best.